Hello, this is Dr. Rebecca Wood, and I would like to welcome you to Week 4. This is our lecture about thematic and poetic analysis. As we read this week's literary works and all literary works, we should think about what are the themes embedded. For example, the primary theme of Joshua McCarter Simpson's poem Away to Canada is freedom from slavery. However, his ending lines allude to a heavenly throne of grace, which could be a reference to an additional theme of freedom and equality in heaven as it should be on earth. And then I have documented this small quote from the poem because we should always document any quoted material with quote marks and an MLA style citation at the end of the sentence. When you read and write about literature, think about what deeper meanings may be hidden or at least more subtly embedded beneath the surface characters and plot. And this week's reading assignments include both prose and poetry, and that might require slightly different reading techniques for each type of work. Many readers prefer prose because it is what we are most used to reading. It appears to be straightforward in most cases, with some usage of literary devices such as alliteration, the repetition of beginning consonants such as fine feathered friend, and parallel construction, matching the verb and noun forms in a sentence to give the reader a feeling of synchronicity such as the sun warms the beach while the moon cools the sea. Poetry is much more likely to use a greater variety and quantity of literary devices, such as rhyme, poetic rhythm, and repetition with minute changes in wording and meaning, so almost the same words could mean different things at different points in the poem. Therefore, reading poetry may require a few additional techniques, such as reading it several times. A poem can pack a great deal of meaning or meanings into a deceptively short package. Reading poetry out loud as well as silently, and you may alternate between the two methods. And looking up any words that are new to you for meanings and secondary meanings. Sometimes the author of the poem may have wanted to put that word in there and have it mean more than one thing, even though it's just one word. Our reading assignments this week include Harriet Jacobs and her book Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And this book is one of several well-known slave narratives, stories written by slaves themselves. And even writing these stories was against the law in some places, since slaves were often forbidden literacy or an education. And as we read Harriet's story, it is not difficult to imagine her emotions as she grew from a happy child to an experienced and endangered adult. And unlike so many of the books and stories some of us may read or experience, Harriet's story really happened. Our next author this week is Phillis Wheatley Peters, and she published a book of poetry only 7 years after having been brought as a slave from Africa to Boston in 1761. And she was not only brilliant, but she was allowed a rare opportunity for an education. She wrote poetry that could have deeper or hidden meanings to decipher as we read it. For example, her poem, An Hymn to the Evening. These are the lines that she wrote. Through all the heavens what beauteous dyes are spread, but the west glories in the deepest red. So may our breasts with every virtue glow, the living temples of our God below. And so what do the words beauteous dyes really mean? Is she just writing about the beautifully different colors of the sunset, or is she writing about possibly something else as well? Our next author is George Moses Horton, and he was a slave in North Carolina for 66 years and published 3 books of poetry. The title of his poem, Liberty and Slavery, sums up its primary theme. However, could there be more meaning in the following stanza of the poem? What is one common symbolic meaning of a dove? Soar on the pinions of that dove which long has cooed for thee, and breathed her notes from Afric's grove, the sound of liberty. And you'll note that when I document a long quote, a block quote, which is the best way to document poetry, that the period actually goes at the end of the quoted material and then the citation goes after the period. That only happens for long quotes or block quotes. So that's an exception in the way that we document quoted material. Our next author this week is Joshua McCarter Simpson, and he was, as the editor of our anthology states, a writer of satirical protest poems, and they were set to popular tunes, and fugitives on the Underground Railroad sang them on their attempts to be free. What does this stanza mean to you? I heard old master pray last night. I heard him pray for me, that God would come and in his might from Satan set me free. So I from Satan would escape and flee the wrath to come. If there's a fiend in human shape, old master must be one. Our next author is James Monroe Whitfield. As our editor of the African American Poetry Book states, Whitfield was an outstanding poet whose impassioned protest verse masterfully combined bitter anger and artistry. Note that I use the editor of our book's name to document any material that was not written by our actual poets, but by the person who put the book together. So that's why I have documented this from Joan Sherman rather than from Whitfield. And what do you think about Whitfield's words about possible repercussions when someone objects to injustice? Is threatened with the dungeon's doom, the felon's cell, the traitor's doom, and treacherous politicians' league with hireling priests to crush and ban all who expose their vile intrigue and vindicate the rights of man. What do you think? We have some very powerful material this week to discuss and read and to think about. And so the most important question to answer in any of your papers about literature is, what do you think? Your professors could read the same source material that you read, so they're not really interested so much in what your sources say as long as you find good material that you can use in your work. They're most interested in your ideas and interpretations of that material. When writing a paper about literature, please document very carefully. It is crucial to separate your ideas and words from those of the source material. When you're writing about literature, you certainly don't want to take credit for the words that you found in your literature. You want to make sure that it's very separate, very apparent that this is the material that you've read and this other material is your thoughts, is what you're thinking. So final hint, the most interesting material in any paper for any class is what you think. So you have to put your own thoughts out there, your own words on the line, and let your professors know what you think. And this is my works cited list for this PowerPoint presentation, because we want to try at all times to document our material carefully. And so it's in alphabetical order. I've started with the last name of each of our sources, including the editor of our anthology. And I've also documented that map, the Underground Railroad, from the National Geographic site, because that is the only image that wasn't from Creative Commons in this PowerPoint presentation. I hope you all have a great week, and I'm looking forward to our discussions and reading your papers. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.